Emotion is one of the most important things to have in your writing. Why? Well, it's the bridge between the character and your reader. One of the biggest things I see in some new writers is the lack of emotion and emotional description in characters. To connect with characters, a reader must be able to know who your character is, where their flaws are, and their strengths. Emotion is what makes them them, and without it, characters fall flat. So how do we make sure that we're bridging the gap between our reader and our character? Well, that's exactly what I'm going to show you today. So first of all, let me explain what I mean when I say emotion in character, because it can mean a lot of things. Emotion in character means a reaction to certain situations, how they feel in the moment, and just overall behavior. I'm going to divide this video up into two parts. The first part is how to know where to put emotion. There are certain defined areas to put emotion. If you're describing how a character feels every other sentence, you might want to ease off some. Otherwise, it can get really slow. On the flip side, if you're never describing how a character feels, or you're only doing it like once a chapter, you may need to describe it in a few more places. The latter part will focus specifically on how to write a description of emotion. How do you describe it, what wordings to use, and how the delivery of it works. As I said earlier, emotion in a character is a reaction to certain situations, how they feel in the moment, and behavior. This will hinge off of your character's personality, so make sure you know what that is. Emotions differ based on a personality. If a character is brash, they may respond to a bad situation with anger. If a character is quiet, they may respond to a bad situation with a different emotion. For this section, I'll be using my book, Padling, as an example. I'll try my best to avoid spoilers if you haven't read it yet, but there may be certain sections with slight spoilers, which, speaking of that, creates a great excuse to go buy a copy of my book if you haven't already. Link is in the description. The first area to put emotion in is during important situations. Whether that's a happy one or a sad one, the character has emotions for any situation, even if it's neutral. In the beginning of my prologue, I have a young knight and a wolf who are both gravely injured. The knight admits to the wolf that he's failed. His reaction to the failure of the situation is regret, and maybe a little bit of anger at himself. So already in the beginning, we have emotion being described during a reaction to a situation. Now, situations are the catalyst for the rest of the emotion post-event. A situation that has happened to a character often lingers and shapes the emotion for a while. Depending on how large of the situation or dilemma, the after effects will last longer. If it was a small situation, like maybe the character received a letter from a friend they've been missing, they would be happy. You would maybe describe their happiness stretching into the next day, but any longer than that may become a little too much. And this leads into another area, which is the normal description of emotion, how they feel in the moment. This is your post-situation emotion. So whatever event occurred to start these emotions within your character, you're describing the lingering emotion. I'm going to use another example from my book, which does include spoilers, so if you don't want to hear the spoilers, skip ahead to this timestamp. Chapter 6 and forward is after the death of Lenny, Jagan's sister, and throughout the rest of the book, Jay deals with the lingering emotions of loss. This is predominant in the last bit of chapter 14, as Jay is still healing, but the topic of Lenny's death is forced to the forefront of his mind. This leads into the second part. For those of you who skipped through, I just used an example from my book, where the protagonist has lost something, and he's dealing with the after effects of it. So the catalyst for our characters' emotions have occurred, and we're in post-event. This leads into their behavior. In chapter 15, Jay's behavior and reaction is to evade or leave to get away from whatever is causing him pain. If your character has experienced a happy moment, maybe instead of evasion, as we see in this tragic moment with Jay, they try to move towards it. So then comes the question, well, how do you describe it? Well, by describing their behavior, you've already completed an aspect of the description. Behavior is an external or physical description. Now, for a good description of emotion, we want both an external and internal. An internal would be a mental description of how they feel. Some external or physical behaviors would maybe be running, shaking, crying, a quivering lip, maybe even fighting. These are all examples of a good external emotional description. Let me write up an example to show you. We've been focusing more on the negative side of emotion, so I'm going to write up a positive example. Her hands began trembling as her legs nearly gave out from under her. With as much strength as she could muster, she forced herself to stay strong. A big smile covered her lips. Her heart beating frantically, she forced her mouth open in order to say something. Nothing came out but an overjoyed laugh of glee. Okay, so from this description, notice how I'm only giving the physical or external aspects of emotion. Nothing like she felt or anything like that. Only physical reactions to emotion. So what are internal or mental descriptions like? Well, internal descriptions are probably my favorite to write because they require your creativity. I've noticed that every single author writes internal descriptions differently. Some are more descriptive than others, and some use more external than internal. For me personally, I'm more poetic almost when I write internal descriptions. I use temperatures and colors a lot. Let me give you an example of how it sounds when you mix external and internal descriptions. Her hands began trembling as her legs nearly gave out from under her. A warm feeling welled in the pit of her stomach, spreading through her like a comforting blanket. With as much strength as she could muster, she forced herself to stay strong. A big smile covered her lips, and she felt her vision tunneling. Heart beating frantically, she forced her mouth open in order to say something. Nothing came out but an overjoyed laugh of glee. So adding some internal description makes it pop more so than it did before. Now I want you to notice one last thing. Except for the very end, I never mention any kind of emotion. I never said she felt a joyous rush or happiness spread throughout her body. This is following the show don't tell rule. Now, it's not a bad thing if you do mention an emotion. I did at the end. But in every line, you don't need to state that she's happy or she's sad. If your description is good enough, your reader won't even have to guess. So here's the formula for what we've learned. For every emotion, there needs to be a catalyst, an event. The emotion begins as a reaction to said event. There needs to be a description post-event. If a character suffered a loss, they should deal with the sadness often. There needs to be behavioral, external, and internal descriptions. Remember, this formula can be applied to any emotion you want to add. Okay, so I hope this has helped. I should have another video out on this topic soon. That one will be emotionally connecting to your audience. So once you have the basics of how to write emotion down, we're going to go in depth into what actually makes a moment sad or happy or even epic, and how to make your reader care and be invested in that moment. So I'll see you all then.